Well, hello, everyone. Pastor Jeremy with our first midweek devotion of the new year. It has been a couple of weeks since we've done one of these. I feel like we've been through every season since that. If you remember Christmas, we had the 20 below, and today it's like 60. And I went for a run this morning, and when it was finishing, it was a mist, and I didn't feel miserable. It was just kind of nice. And so we've kind of been through it all over the last few weeks. I hope that you had a great Christmas and a good start to your new year. We are finally getting back into the swing of things. There's a lot of exciting things happening at the church in January, and so looking forward to spending more time with you all. This Sunday is our deacon ordination Sunday. We have 3 deacon candidates that we will ordain, and so that'll be a meaningful service for all of us. It is a time to celebrate what God is doing in the lives of these deacons and their families, but also to celebrate what God is doing at this church. We have so many faithful deacons, and so it's just a time to enter into covenant time together and spend some time with each other. So this week I am going to be be teaching out of Matthew chapter 1, and it's the genealogy of Jesus. This is actually the text that I was supposed to have used on Sunday, but because of deacon ordination and a few things, I just decided that I would not dedicate a Sunday to this text. Not because I didn't want to, or it's not important. I just really wanted to make sure that I hit some of the other ones, and I didn't want to get too far off track going forward. And so this past Sunday, if you were able to watch or listen online, I preached out of the baptism of Jesus and talked about John the Baptist, which is actually the story for this coming Sunday. So we're a little ahead of schedule. All of that to say, starting Sunday, if you have been following with our daily readings, we should be back on track to where the stories will line up to the message for the following Sunday. Lord willing, and barring any major things happening, we will be back on track and should be like that, as far as I know, through Easter. And so it'll be a chance to kind of have some rhythm with that. I've been explaining it more than we've actually been in it. It feels like for a while, but that'll be not the case hopefully soon. So this week I chose to use the Sunday text of Matthew's genealogy, but I didn't want to skip it, and so thought I'd talk about it tonight. And so here we go. I will not read the text. I usually do. I will encourage you to go and read the text if you would like to. It is out of Matthew chapter 1. And it's important. I just, for the sake of you all listening to me, I feel like you can just read through it. I will say that if you are bored with reading it, not that we'd ever be bored reading the Bible, preacher shouldn't say that. Andrew Peterson has a song called Matthew's Begats, and he sings this. And in our house, we play it a lot. And it's one of those things that's actually sung during Christmas, during his Behold the Lamb of God album. But in May, I'll find myself just singing, Abraham had Isaac, Isaac he had Jacob, Jacob he had Judah and his kin. And I'm singing this genealogy of Jesus because that's just how our brain works, which it could be worse, right? I woke up yesterday singing the Burger King commercial song. I won't sing that for you, but our brains do some interesting things sometimes. All right. So when we talk about genealogies, I don't know if you have done any of these ancestry tests. If you have gone back into your family line a few years ago, my wife gave me a genealogy test. The 23andMe is the website that we used, where they, you swab your cheek and you send it back, and then they put it in their computer and have all the rights to your medical stuff probably forever. But anyways, they tell you what your makeup is, and you watch these commercials and people be like, I had no idea that I was, whatever descendant, or I always thought I was this, and it turns out that my family history is this. Well, I found out pretty much what I expected. I was like 98% Caucasian, white, British, Irish. There wasn't a lot of like, oh wow, I didn't know that. I think I'm 0.01% West African or something, but I was like, oh, that was $50 to basically know that I'm Irish and British. So anyways, when you take these tests though, you never know what's going to happen. And we have this fascination of knowing where we came from. Everybody maybe assumes that maybe their family came over on the Mayflower, or they can go through Ellis Island, but we don't really know. And every now and then I get emails from this company that I use and be like, you have new DNA ancestors. Would you like to meet them? And I'm like, can I have some more information? Like some family members we may be okay not knowing as much as others. If it's Bill Gates and he wants to give me some of the family money, then maybe we could talk. But anyways, our genealogies play out into, I'm sorry, I'm kind of just all over this morning. I'm enjoying my coffee and I hope you're riding along with me. So anyways, we're looking at this genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, and we see a lot of names. And if you were to look through this, you may be like, oh, I know some of these names. And then there's some that maybe are not as familiar to us. But Matthew is the only gospel that starts with this genealogy. We don't see the genealogy placed like this in any of the other gospels. And full disclosure, the genealogy doesn't match up historically with a few things. There were a few kings that he leaves out, and there are times when Matthew doesn't follow the traditional male succession line, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And so his intention when we read something like this, when we're reading each of the gospels, is we need to know that each gospel writer has their own message about God's grace in this person of Jesus that they're trying to tell. So Matthew has a particular vantage point and an agenda. We see Luke and Mark, and they all have this different thing that they want to share. And so when we're reading this, it's not so much that we're able to go back and say, well, this is exactly all these things, but we're seeing these numbers that are placed. We're seeing the groupings. If you're looking at your text, you'll see that there are different groupings that are there. And there's really three movements that we see. The first begins with Abraham. The second begins with David. And then the last one is after Josiah, when they've entered into exile in Babylon. And that leads up to the time when they're longing for Jesus. And it wraps up really well, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But our question becomes, why are we reading this genealogy? Why would Matthew put it in here? It's kind of a dry start to maybe begin the story if you're not sure of what's going on. But I thought it was interesting as we were reading these three movements. You begin with Abraham. So Jesus's line of succession goes all the way back to this covenant that we read early on in our Sacred Stories journey through the narrative lectionary, where Abraham is promised all these descendants more numerous than those in the sky. And so we see that God has entered into this covenant and has latched onto this group of people. And we're going to see his faithfulness extended to this covenant. But we know that during this time, you have the period of the judges, and you see these tribes of Israel, and they keep saying, we want a king, we want a king, we want a king. And God's like, I don't think you want a king. I don't think you want a king. You don't need a king. You need me. And they say, no, we really want a king. And so finally he relents and he gives them King Saul. And Saul was fine for a little bit, but then he struggled and he was not doing what God desired. And so we see King David is in this second grouping. King David, the father of Solomon, but even when we see this, we see whose mother had been Uriah's wife. We're seeing that this story is placed under some reminders of brokenness. Mighty King David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife, Uriah being the one who David had killed. We see a messy inclusion of David in this line, but we see with David this time of the kings that is here, and you see this progression that continues on and on and on, and basically you have not really many good kings. They start getting full of themselves and doing what looks like in their best interest, and they punish for it, and they're brought back, and they're punished, and they're brought back, and they're punished with brought. And then Josiah is actually a good king, and it says he returns the people back to Scripture, but just after Josiah, they fall away again. And so this is God kind of probably saying, I told you didn't really want the king, but they wanted the king, and so this is what plays out for them. And so finally, in this third movement, they are in exile. And you see all these Shealtiel and Zerubbabel and Eliakim and Zadok and all of these leaders who are here, these people who are in this line of Jesus, each having an important role. And then it finally leads to the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, who's called Messiah. It is with Jesus that we find this hope of returning out of this long-awaited exile. During the Christmas season, during the season of Advent, we sing, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. This is a way of maybe seeing completion of Abraham going down to David and then seeing things spiraling out of that, but all of a sudden now it is working its way back until the promise of Abraham is fulfilled through Jesus. Jesus is in the line of succession of King David, meaning that he was a faithful, or he was Jewish by trade. This was not Jesus coming as an outsider. He is fulfilling these commandments, these things that a Messiah was promised to be. But we have more questions. Why use this genealogy? Well, in this genealogy, we see that Matthew includes some things that are unusual. He includes women. This is not normal. And the women that are included, some of them have what we would consider to be maybe a shady history, but God is able to use these women as a part of this. So this is God's inclusive nature. But it's not only that they were women, but we also see that that Matthew in here includes the Gentiles. There are some Gentiles in here who are part of this, which would have been shocking to say the least, because they would have not considered been a part of this Jewish line. But nevertheless, they are part of God's story. We see people in the midst of their sin. We see people who did a lot of bad things, but we also see a God who remains faithful. So why would Matthew include all this? One, he is trying to lay out the case so that people can see that Jesus is coming as the Messiah and that he is a fulfillment of all of these things that we have been working through in the narrative lectionary, but that they have been waiting for thousands of years to come. Jesus is able to fulfill it. But when he comes, he doesn't fulfill it in the way that they expected. This was not the clean, orderly line. This is a line filled with a bunch of people who have been excluded, a bunch of people who've been caught up in their own sin. There's a lot of people who've been counted down and out, and yet they get to be a part of this line that leads to the Messiah. Matthew is setting the stage that Jesus is welcoming when he comes. He is establishing a kingdom that is open to all, not just a select few. As we continue on this journey, we have this opportunity to pursue God with everything that we have, because this story is about us, but it isn't just about us. Sometimes we're very individualistic in our faith, and so we're like, okay, what is God doing in my life? And if it doesn't seem really powerful, then is God really there? And we're laser focused on how things are going on in our world. But when we see something like this genealogy, and we look at the story of Scripture, and we look at the long line of church history, we are reminded that we are a small part of God's greater story. And so while it is about us and it's about the love of God and the grace that has been extended to me, I have to remind myself that I am more focused on God's grander story, even if it doesn't always turn out the way that I thought it might in my life. Because this Messiah that comes in a way that is defying tradition, but it is meeting everything that God commanded. In Matthew, as we continue down for the next few months, we're going to be in the Gospel of Matthew, and we're going to see a new vision for the world where Jesus is going to explain, you've heard that it said, but I tell you this, and you see these new ways of living, and it is good news for those who have been left out. So our question is this: do you want to be a part of it? We are linked to our past. We can't get away from our stories. We are products of how we were raised. We are products of those who have gone before us, and we are linked to our past, but our future does not have to be defined by it. Jesus comes and restores the world and establishes this kingdom and explains all these new way of living, but he does so in a way that helps redeem all the bad that had happened before him. It is a chance to begin again. There's a song called Better Days by the Goo Goo Dolls. I heard someone cover it on a Christmas album one time, and it says, tonight's the night the world begins again. The promise extended through Abraham, the journey all the way to King David, and they wanted another King David, but instead they see a fulfillment of this promise as Jesus comes as Messiah. As we enter into this new year, we have a new opportunity to be a part of this good story that God is doing. We are able to place ourselves in a situation to say that what happens to me is important, but it is not more important than making sure that God's will is completed on the earth, because ultimately the best thing we can do is to be where God would have us to be. And so as a church, as individuals, as we pursue our daily lives and our callings and wherever it is that God has placed us, we want to be taking comfort in the fact that God can restore, that God can redeem, but that God invites us to be a part of this story. I hope that you're having a great week. I'm looking forward to Deacon Ordination Sunday and all the things that God is doing. January is a planning month around here. We've got a lot of meetings set up, but they're about good things that are going on. If you do not have a church home, if you've been thinking about visiting with us, we would love to extend the hand of invitation to you. We would love to have you worship with us. If you have questions, please reach out, and we hope you have a great week. I'll talk to you later.